back on track here.
Let's get back. As you know, our tagline is taking the road less traveled when it comes to Walt. Well, today we have our king with us. I would like to welcome Todd James Pierce. Todd is the author of 2 books on history of animation and the work of Disney Studios. These are 3 Years in Wonderland and The Life and Times of Ward Kimball. And he's worked on numerous TV shows, such as the History Channel, How Disney Built America, and ABC's A Century of Dreams, which was about how Disney affects American culture. He is the host of the Disney History Institute podcast, which is astonishing. He does like one a week. I have no idea how he does that. Yeah. There's some topics you cover that are just beyond anything. Like one of them going to Alaska and the nuclear bombs or whatever.
You're talking about the Golden Horseshoe.
Yeah, the Golden Horseshoe people going to Alaska. Yes, that was bizarre.
Well, yeah, they needed to close and refurbish the saloon at Disneyland. Everyone there is under contract, so they what are we gonna do with these people? And so they put them essentially on a goodwill trip to a number of mostly military installations, including one where they had recently lost some nuclear explosives when a plane crashed.
Wow. Well, I think that was like a thing too, right? When the celebrities would do the military tours and whatnot. So that's not all that unusual, but that's a great story. And hey, on this show, just so you know, we love stories.
I'm sorry.
We love stories.
The
Feel free to
plan.
go off script and go on the stories. We love stories.
Yeah.
The original plan for that was they were going to go to Asia during the beginnings of the Vietnam War. And so you need to kind of understand that a lot of management at Disneyland and in the Disney studio during that period tends to slant Republican and tends to be very pro-military. And often a lot of people with military service as well, including Joe Fowler. And so after that trip had been planned, it started to dawn on them that maybe this was not a very good idea, that it was kind of dangerous and it was a politically divisive. And so instead, they're going to send them to the Arctic Circle in the middle of winter, where everything's frozen and no one really has the right clothes to go there because they've all just gone shopping to go to Asia. So it was an interesting last-minute thing that was put together that had some unusual turns in it.
Nice.
So
that would have been the original Golden Horseshoe, like Wally Bogue and that whole cast.
Oh yeah, Wally Bogue went. Yes, Wally Bogue went. Yes.
Nice. That's awesome.
I'd like to know a little bit more about how Disney built America and a Century of Dreams. What was your involvement?
So the books get a certain amount of interest from people doing other things like documentaries or TV series, and so that's part of it. But the first one that I worked on was the PBS special. Many years ago. I actually forget it was the 2-part special. I forget exactly what it was called, on the life of Walt Disney. And I believe really what happens in a lot of cases is people producing a similar show will see what's adjacent. We'll go back and watch the previous ones and make a little checklist of who was in there and kind of sounded okay, and then they'll try to contact those people. I'm pretty sure that's the research. That's the research process, because once I did one, there was a lot more offers that came by pretty quickly.
So
nice.
How Disney Built America.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was a recent one. That was a multi-part series on the History Channel, and so I did a few things for that. I did some, on screen, just like we're doing now, where they ask me questions and then they find about an 8-second clip that they like of of it that fits the narrative that they're trying to explore. Then almost always there's research questions, because mostly these people, they might have some expertise in Hollywood history or in mid-century history, but maybe not so much with the Disney studio. And I can tell you that a very familiar experience for me is about halfway through, in developing the scripts for these, or kind of like the narrative layout, they realize that the history of the Disney company is way more complicated than what they had initially imagined, and they usually need a little bit of help putting it together. So usually that's one of my roles, and then quite often I have a very large collection of home movies that I've collected for like 25 years of Disneyland and Disney World and Epcot, usually focused around like the opening periods. And so I think I have something like 500 or 600 sets of family films from early Disneyland and other places, along with slides and photos. So I usually end up, if they're focused in those areas as opposed to early studio, they usually use some of those resources as well in what they're creating.
I did not read your books, but I'd like to know or tell us a little bit about 3 Years in Wonderland.
Okay. So 3 Years in Wonderland is the story of Walt and Roy Disney and a third person, C.V. Wood, that I think up until the book came out, like no one had ever heard of because he didn't get along with
No.
Walt at all, which was one of the reasons that Roy Disney hired him. And so
Wait, he hired him because he didn't get along with Walt? Did you just say
yes,
that?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so in the Disney company during the lifetime of Walt and Roy Disney, there's two lines of authority. There's the line of authority that comes down from Walt that goes to the creative people mostly. So Walt wholly owns WED Enterprises that does design work for Disneyland. Walt is a part owner of Disneyland Incorporated, which in 1955 is a company wholly separate from the Disney studio. And outside of that, Walt would be seen as kind of the executive lead among the artists that are over at the studio. And so that's his line of command. Then on the other side, there's Roy, who oversees all of the accountants, merchandising people, lawyers, so the business people. And so C.V. Wood is going to be hired as a president, as an administrator of Disneyland Incorporated. So he is hired by Roy. Walt is not there at the meeting where C.V. Wood is hired. And one of the reasons that C.V. Wood is seen as desirable is because he will stand up to Walt and say that some things can't be done because of the costs. And so this is something that really appeals to Roy at the time. And so there's friction between these two people from the beginning.
Well, I mean, I think that's really he had to have somebody come in that was the voice of reason, right? Because there's always the ideology and then reality, right? You know, and you got to have that balance, and that makes sense that Roy would bring somebody else in to be the bearer of the bad news.
So you are absolutely correct. That's a really good plan. The problem is that they both got tricked. They both got played a little bit by C.V. Wood. So C.V. Wood at the time was the head of the LA division of the Stanford Research Institute, SRI. And the person that, you know, many Disney fans know from SRI is Buzz Price, who was beneath C.V. Wood. Though neither Walt nor Roy knew this, C.V. Wood was essentially a con man. C.V. Wood had faked his college degrees, but he was extremely bright and could kind of get away with it. He could figure out situations very, very quickly and with some study. He came from abject poverty. He grew up primarily in Texas. And he went to college because his aunt paid for him to go first to a religious school. He was asked to leave the religious school when he burned down a barn. And then he goes to the University of Oklahoma, where he eventually has to leave because of poor grades. He's he's in the petroleum engineer program. I did contact both schools when I was writing the book, and so we'll assume that this story is okay to tell now. Schools are supposed to give you dates of attendance, degree program, attempted and degrees confirmed. They're supposed to give you those three things. If you write in, usually there's a fee. You can do this for anyone that's attended there. And so the University of Oklahoma sends me those exact things. So I know exactly how long he's been there, which isn't long, and what he has attempted to do. And there's no degrees conferred. The other school, I called them up trying to get the same information. Um, and the person that I talked to in the registrar's office said, "Just a second, let me go get his records." And so she was able to find his records, and she
No
comes
kidding.
back and she was like, "Oh, this is not good." And she goes down his F, D, F, it really wasn't good. And so you could see why it was that he had to leave. At most, maybe between these 3 years, he might have had enough credits combined to be a sophomore, maybe. Um, but anyways, he's forced to leave the University of Oklahoma, and he's applying to a company that's going to make planes for the war effort called Consolidated Vultee. And he goes to the interview. He's going to try to be a welder or anything just to get money. He's broke at this point. And so there's a misunderstanding that happens at this interview. One of them one of the people that's interviewing him misreads his resume and believes that he has a degree in petroleum engineering from the University of Oklahoma. And they ask him, "Why is it that you want to be a welder or a riveter here when you have a degree in engineering?" And C.V. Wood sees this as an opportunity, and he says, "Well, I'm just, trying to make a living, but if there's something like that, I'd really like to use my degree here." And so from that point forward, he just decided that he would give himself a degree in engineering, which in the 1940s, no one ever questioned. He figures out how to oversee these projects very quickly, and he rises and consolidated fast. He becomes the person that oversees the development of the Liberator bomber during the war. He works directly with the Pentagon. He's extremely well paid. And from that, he's able to advance his career. At one point, while working for SRI, he also claims that he has a PhD in economics. But that doesn't last too long because he has a little bit more trouble trying to pull that off than pulling off that he has a degree in engineering. And all of this is before the internet. This is during a period where you'd have to use an operator to make a long distance call. And so no one ever checks up on him ever. There was a period that I was doing research pretty early on in this. A lot of it was on the ground. I was going around and talking with people that C.V. Wood had grown up with. And I was and a friend of his in Texas. And I had outlines kind of, worked out. And a lot of it was based on things that C.V. Wood had said. And there was this kind of muddiness around the late 30s, early 40s that I couldn't quite put together. And I'd done work like this. There's a number of books that are not Disney books that are before this. So these were familiar things to me. It's like people's memory is not accurate. If you were to ask them what they did 50 years ago, maybe it's off by a year or two. That's not necessarily something to be concerned about because that's just how people's minds work. They conflate things the further back memory goes. But there was this muddiness about the college years. I couldn't just get them to work out. And I was at his house and I was asking him about this. It's like, okay, so how long was he with you at the University of Oklahoma? And it came up, it's like, well, he told us he graduated and got his degree, but some of us thought he was just lying about it. And then the light bulb went off. It's like, oh, of course he was lying about it. That makes perfect sense. I will call the schools and find out. So anyways, that's who they end up hiring. There's a lot of problems that come from hiring a person that has some less than ideal ethics, especially within a company that's brand oriented. And so there's problems that roll out from this, including the fire that C.V. Wood, and he hires a number of his friends. His friends are called the Bombers. Long story there. We won't go into it. He hires his friends, the Bombers, to work just under him at Disneyland. And there's some houses that there's one house that they weren't able to purchase in the parking lot. And so CV Wood's plan for this is that there might be an accidental fire late at night that would speed the process along of clearing out the parking lot. So there's a number of problems that kind of come with this that the Disney brothers slowly start to figure out along with some lawyers.
Wow. I've never heard any of this. Have you, Carrie?
Oh, okay. So what year was Mr. Wood hired by Roy? Which estimate?
He's hired, or so he's working with SRI with Disney in 1953 when they're doing the land use and feasibility study. And Woody, his nickname is Woody. Woody is enamored with Hollywood life and has been his entire life. When he was a kid, he used to dress up as Tom Mix, the cowboy. So he was working in Texas at an aircraft plant for the military, a subcontractor for the military. Then he moves to San Diego for a while, then to LA. And Midwest companies are looking to develop plants in Southern California or offices in Southern California. And so he's mostly working with them to track tax rates, utility rates, land costs, and other things so that companies such as Ford and Chevy, when they're going to move some product work out here, can find the best financially advantageous places to build whatever it is they're going to build. Then with that, that's how he slowly gets involved with Walt Disney directly, because it's not even with the studio initially. Roy's not very interested in building Disneyland. And so he's involved with Walt Disney in terms of finding the most economical place that Disneyland can be built. Walt has already tried a couple of things that hadn't really worked out very well. And so the famous story is the one across the street from the studio.
Yeah, you see that
And
model. Yeah, at the studio, you see the
yes,
model of that.
yeah. So there's all the drawings of what's going to be over there, and it looks a lot like the Chicago Railroad's Fair. So there's a lot of so there's drawings about what's going to be over there, and that doesn't work out because he has architects. William Pereira and others are working on that to kind of plan that out, and that doesn't work out because he doesn't have enough land. Really, that's the big stumbling point. He has about 20 acres on that side of Riverside Drive, which is right across the street from the studio. But he doesn't, if he's going to use all of that for the amusements, he doesn't have enough place for parking. And so he wants to lease land from the city to put a parking lot of about the same size there so it can support his amusement park. And the city won't give it to him. And from there, they put down some money on a land option in or near Calabasas. And there's some drawings there that Harper Goff, a fairly famous Disney artist, does. And you can tell it's like this hilly terrain where it's going to be. And it's really not very well suited for an amusement park, especially if you want to build a lake and put a put a riverboat on it. And so at this point, they've spent some money developing the Riverside Drive area and spent some money developing and putting an option on the land in Calabasas. And Walt's at the point where he realizes this is really not his strength area. So he asks one of his architect friends for a recommendation of perhaps someone that might be able to help him with this. And that's how he gets hooked into SRI and CV Wood and Buzz Price. And from Walt's perspective, this is all new for him as well. There's no reason to suspect that CV Wood is not the person that he claims to be.
It could be one of those things too. He's one of those smart people who knew enough to buy himself a little bit of time, surround himself with people who kind of do know what to do and make you look good. I've seen that before too, which is it's a good leadership kind of quality that don't necessarily need a degree in engineering to be able to pull it off. And obviously, he at this point in time, he had done it so many times, he knew exactly how to get his foot in. And wow, just amazing story.
Yeah, he goes into city planning after this, and he does very well there.
Wow. Just
Well,
well, you know what? He's creative. He just shifts and goes where, I mean, Southern California, let's be honest, was the boom of all booms in as far as at that period of time. I mean, we talked about how, we mentioned it before on the show, how Walter Knott kind of started the first theme park right down the road, had his own train, and started with a chicken dinner restaurant and turned into something. Walt kind of gets an idea there. Baseball comes out here. Walter O'Malley, the other Walt, brings baseball to the West Coast. That kind of gives it some legitimacy. I mean, all this in that mid 50s kind of time frame is just starting to really blow up, and it just makes sense for this guy to seize the day. That's wow.
yeah, he's very smart. He's able to insert himself into different business situations, and he's a quick study. He can figure it out, and he can get to a place where he has a certain level of depth in terms of what he's trying to do. Um, Within a month or two, there was that movie Catch Me If You Can.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen it in like 10 or 15 years, but this is probably a pretty good
Similar
approximation
kind
of
of
what,
guy.
yeah, what Stevie would have been like. Yeah.
Wow.
After Disneyland, I mean, he's really good at understanding. Walt was really good at understanding what American tastes were like, and Stevie Wood was too. He understands that this idea of like cinematic themed amusement parks is going to be popular, and so once he's fired by Roy Disney, um, he uh, he's given a fairly large severance package, and then he uses that money to set up his own consulting engineering firm to build knockoff Disneylands across the country, including Freedomland, which was the most famous of them in New York. But he understands that what he's doing is he's following the baby boomers, that the baby boomers are going to be interested in this type of amusements up until like the 60s, mid 60s, but then they're going to be older and need other things. And so he goes into city planning, where he builds planned communities in the 60s. Lake Havasu City is the largest of the communities that he built.
Kidding.
Wow. That's pretty successful. Wow.
Yeah, so he does very well for himself, but it's because he's naturally bright. He grows up in true poverty. And because of that, there's this desperation and protectionism that he has all of his life, where he wants to make sure that he's also a very loyal person to his friends. He and all of his friends are taken care of. And so he uses his skills to engage different business models, from the war to the baby boomers as kids to these planned communities that he works on for years in the 60s and 70s.
That's awesome.
So I still have questions.
Mm-hmm.
I brought up, what year was this? So it had to be the late 40s, right? Because when Roy first hired Mr. Wood. So
54.
Oh, 50, I thought you said 4. Sorry, I thought you asked me a question.
54.
Okay.
54.
54. But so Disney opened in 54.
Disneyland opens in 55.
So this all now Pete.
Yeah, go ahead.
Pete brought up, well, why did you say he hired him, Pete? The buck stops here. What did you say? What was your?
Oh no, he had mentioned before that Roy kind of wanted him on board to be that kind of person to help give him, when he had to tell Walt, no, we don't have the money to do that. He was going to be the backup guy.
1954. So we had the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, now we're in the 50s, and he's finally getting someone to say, Walt, you can't do this. Okay.
Yeah. It works. I mean, he does take on that role. One of the original plans for Disneyland was to have a circus area. It would have been just off the hub, kind of where the tiki room and things are now. It's not there originally, but this is one of the things that Walt most wants to build. And so this is going to be kind of an expansion area in Disneyland shortly after it opens. It's going to be at the back of the park now, where roughly where Small World is today. And so C.V. Wood tells Walt that he feels financially this is a bad idea. And under his fiduciary obligations to look out for the interest of the collective owners of Disneyland Incorporated, which includes people like Western Publishing and ABC Paramount Theaters. So there's a lot of other people that have financial interest here. He tells Walt that no, they are not going to build a circus area. And so to make a circus area, Walt first has to get wagons and tents. And he gets these through the studio because they're going to make a circus picture. So they're going to be kind of like extras left over from Toby Tyler and things like that. And then to negotiate with C.B. Wood, who's the president of Disneyland Incorporated. Walt is not the president of Disneyland Incorporated. He works out a deal where he is going to rent land back from Disneyland to put his circus at the back of the park. So it is a rented area at the back of the park that Walt has for his circus.
Yeah. But that was kind of normal for the time. Knotts did the same thing when he had somebody else come in and build like the Calico Mine Ride and the Log Ride. They were like rental things that the guy had put in, and they it was like a rental.
Well, over at Knotts, I mean, over at
Knotts. Yeah. So that was like for that time period, that was pretty normal.
Well, there was all kind of places that were leased out in Disneyland when it opens because they don't have enough money to run to the park without these lessees. And so Walt becomes a lessee in his own park.
So was Wood's title president?
He was the first president, and then after that, there's no. Yeah, he's president of Disneyland Incorporated.
Disneyland, but was that a new company set up?
Yeah,
for Disneyland.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes,
wow.
Yes.
Okay, this is. Now I'm gonna have to listen to that. So I'm sure
we should maybe have this to be the first show as C.V. Wood as the first show. Look at the penthouse.
Yeah, there's no awesome. President of Disneyland after C.V. Wood, I believe, until Jack Lindquist. And so the people that run most of Disneyland are going to be like the oversee operations committees. There'll be people like Dick Nunes and stuff like that.
Wow.
But they didn't have the title president. Walt felt this was a bad idea going forward.
Now, is he the protagonist of this book, or is he just a character in the building of Disneyland?
About half the book follows Walt and Roy, and about half of the book follows C.B. Wood.
That's amazing. Amazing.
It follows both of them from childhood up to the opening of Disneyland.
I have, in the people we have on the show and the research I do, I have learned about so many new Disney characters, people I never knew that played a pivotal role. And here's another one.
Big time. Yeah. President of Disneyland? Yeah, that's a big one.
That is incredible.